My name is Giles Gunn. I'm professor and chair of Global and International Studies and professor of English, and also affiliate professor in the departments of Religious Studies and the program in Comparative Literature. I teach a course on theories of culture, cross-cultural and intercultural understanding. Well, the core of that class actually is a journey, frankly. It's a way of taking students from the question of how, in any case, we study those not ourselves, through a series of problematic ways of posing that question, to an attempt to come to grips with ways that question has now been made more difficult to ask thanks to new geographies of anger and terror, on to the questions about how we can even think about ways of imagining other lives and putting ourselves in some sort of accountable relationship to what they make of us as well as they make of themselves, when many of the terms we used to use for that kind of understanding, let's say cosmopolitanism, are themselves under question, are themselves felt to be too West-centric or Eurocentric. This is an inquiry in which I'm by no means alone. Some of the most interesting thinking, I believe, going on in the global sphere right now is associated in one way or another with the attempt to try to pose ethical questions, even come up with a kind of global ethics. The idea of the global is something that's been around. That is to say, people have been well aware of how societies as well as peoples have developed in interaction with each other over very long spans of time. Within the last 50 or 100 to 50 years, we've become more and more aware of the multitude of ways in which the world is interwoven into not just systems but networks of interrelationship, interdependency, intervention, interaction. We've known for a long time that there have been various kinds of forces, political, religious, we could also say economic, long before the development of what we now think of as the global economy, that held the world together. So my interest in things intellectual have always been international in a very specific way. And the kinds of questions that I ask have always been informed by how the rest of the world or the whole of the world seems to work. My chief interest, even though I've worked on various kinds of cultural materials and in various traditions of philosophy as well as religion, but my chief interest is ethical. That is, I have always found myself going back to ask questions about, under certain circumstances, what is the better life to be led? And that question has always pushed the inquiry out beyond narrow, either national or even regional boundaries toward a more global context. To put it rather crudely, it's an interest in the whole issue of otherness and the problem of how we understand ourselves in relationship to others, how we begin to get to know others, why it's so important that we learn how to see from their perspective as well as our own. But I'm also considering other ways in which the notion of the human and the possibility of sharing an understanding of other people has become recently more problematic. Seeing if I can tease out, that's the best way I could put it, ways of understanding what kind of stake we have in our attempts not simply to understand others, but to understand ourselves from the perspective of others. I had long been interested in various ways in which violence operates in, as it were, American culture and its European antecedents. But the whole issue of violence, and now cast on a global, not just a national or transnational scale, became a central preoccupation of one of my later books, the book called Beyond Solidarity, Pragmatism and Difference in a Globalized World, where I was asking the question of how cycles of so-called systemic violence can in fact be either reversed or diverted or mitigated. But a second matter that came to the fore for me had to do with the kinds of intellectual and conceptual frameworks in which global questions might be placed. I had been working for some time on, along with many other people in America and particularly in Europe, in rethinking the roots of what was once an American but has long since become a kind of cosmopolitan pragmatist framework. And the more I thought about this, the more I began to realize that pragmatism offered a way of putting and assessing certain kinds of dilemmas, moral and otherwise, on a global scale, then began to write more about theories of the global, not theories of recent globalization, but theories of ways of conceptualizing how it is that the world is interlinked in different ways and on different levels of experience, and how those ways might be understood. And one of the books that I've just finished is a book, America and the Misshaping of a New World Order, and tries to investigate the ways in which culture and cultural forms and norms, figurations, assumptions, and values plays an ever-increasing role in the formation of foreign policy, of indeed the revisioning of the way the world is put together in political as well as economic and other terms. How it is ideas as much as it is practices, and not so much geomilitary or geopolitical factors, but cultural assumptions that shape the policies that we adopt. A second book that I'm working on, growing out of my book on Beyond Solidarity, is a new book I'm calling Ideas to Die For, which really studies what the subtitle calls the human under siege, and attempts to investigate some of the ways that the whole idea of a shared humanity has become more and more problematic. To some degree, in the face of the threat of world terror and the vast rise in ethnic consciousness and difference, I can't stress enough the fact that I think that the thing we most lack in the world is better or deeper understanding of others, even of ourselves, because I don't really believe we can understand ourselves without understanding ourselves through the way others view us. But that said, I don't think there's going to be much argument that what the world needs more of and lacks a good deal of is the ability to understand others in themselves. And that's the kind of inquiry that I think lies behind the things I write about, the things I care about.